Hello, in this video we're going to see how to use vectors and classes. In the previous video you have seen how to use classes in P5, but now we'll see how to use the vectors that we've learned in classes. So we'll learn three main vectors that we call the position, the velocity, and the acceleration. So you can read a little bit about these three online in terms of physics, but velocity is basically the rate of change of position, and acceleration is rate of change of velocity. But we'll see how they all get together in P5. So we can just start with creating a class first. Let's call it animation or something, class animation. And the first thing you do inside the class is create a constructor. And we can pass two arguments, x, y. And open a bracket. And inside this, we'll define the position vector. So the way to define things in constructor, if you remember, is using this keyword. So what we'll do is we'll say this dot pos equals create vector, and in the bracket here we'll put the x and the y, the arguments. And similarly, to create the velocity vector, we'll say this dot pel equals create vector, and you can just give random values here to start with to see what happens. Let's try 1 0. So now so far you've defined the position and velocity vectors. Now from the previous video we've seen that after the constructor you give the movement function. So let's call it move. So this is similar to what we've done earlier. And in this move you'll say how your object or your shape needs to move. So let's see, let's say this dot pos dot x equals, you must have seen this in the practice if you've done the practice from the previous week. So similar, you can say this dot pos dot y equals this dot pos dot y plus this dot vel dot y. So just remember the velocity always gets added to the position, and the acceleration will get added to velocity because that's the rate of change of each other. So this will how the things will move. So let's call it the movement of the shape. And the next one is actually the shape. Let's call it the shape function. And in this, you'll say what shape you want to make. So you always start with stroke. Let's give it some color. And you say fill, give some colors, something like this. And let's do an ellipse that we have done so far. And now in place of x, y, we always do this .pos.x, comma this .pos.y, because we're using the x and y from the position vector. And the last two things are the size of the ellipse. Right. This so far is the class, similar to the previous one, but now instead of just variables, we're using vectors, which is position and velocity, and the velocity is getting added to the position. So this is similar to the practice, but before you can run this, you have to create the instance for the class. So you say let w, just like before, and in here let's make this 600 600, and in this you'll have to create using the new keyword for animation. Okay, so this will create an instance for the class which will help us use this class to draw the animation. And inside the draw function, we use the W to call the functions from the class. So you see w.move, w dot, what was it, shape. So we're doing the same thing as before. The only difference is we are creating vectors now to do the same thing. Now let's run this and check. Let me see if I'm recording. Yeah, it's getting recorded. If I run this, hopefully an animation should show up with an ellipse where the velocity is getting added to. So look at that, it's way high up on the top. That's because in the new keyword here, we have to give the position. Let's start in the middle. Let's do width divided by 2, height divided by 2. Spelling of width is right. Now if I run this, hopefully the shape will be in the middle. So look at that. The 1, 0 that we put here is making the position move in that direction. If I change this to say 1, -1, and run this, look at that, it's going diagonal. Similarly, if I try -1, -1, and run this is going in the opposite direction. So the velocity is basically telling the position how to move and at what speed. That's the function of the velocity vector. So now another new thing is, you see these two lines here, they can be written in a better way. So instead of these two things, we'll use a new function which is called the add function. So just write down the add function. And this is how you do this. So you say this dot position dot add, open bracket, this dot vel. So this thing here, this line here, line 25, does the same thing as what line 27 and 28 do. So instead of doing the two things, we can just do it using a single line code. So remember, the smaller the code, the better. So now if I run this, hopefully the same thing should happen. Moving in. Look at that. The same thing is happening as we did before. But instead of these two lines, we're using the add function. Now, the next question will be, what if you want the ellipse to move in random positions? This is giving particular positions. But what if you wanted to move in random position? For this, you have to define the velocity vector to be random. So the next thing will be how to define random vectors inside the class. And the function to use is called, this is important, the function to use is called p5 dot vector dot random 2d open and close bracket. So what this will do is, this will make the position go in random direction. So let's see, if I run this, let's see what happens. Look at that. Once it's going in that direction, if I run this again, look at that, it's going in a different direction. If I run this again in another direction, and so on. So basically, this is creating a random velocity vector. But if you notice, the speed in all of them is the same because we haven't specified the speed here. So to define a random speed, so the next thing is, how do you define a random velocity? It means a random speed. Remember, velocity is a vector. It means it has position. So it's got direction and magnitude, two things. So this one will give a random direction. and here we will give random speed. To do this, you have to use another function which is called MULT, multiplication function. And you do it like this. You say this dot vel dot mult, and in brackets you say random and give any two numbers, say between 1 and 4, something like this. And this will provide random speeds to your position vector for the shape ellipse. So let's see if I run this. Look at that, once it's going in that direction, and if I run this in another direction at a different speed, another direction at a different speed, if you just give a single number, then it's between 0 to 4. So look at that, the speeds are changing and the directions are also, look at the speed here, just crawling here. Okay, so this is very important. The multiplication function will help you give random speeds to your object or the shape. Right, just like we did position and velocity, there's one more thing which will be called the acceleration. The acceleration is the rate of change of velocity. So just like you define the velocity here, the same way you can define the acceleration like this. You say this dot ACC, which is acceleration, equals P5 dot vector dot random 2D. Okay, and if I run this, let's see what happens. But before that, we need to add the acceleration to the velocity. Remember, acceleration gets added to velocity. So you say this dot VEL, just like before, but in this time we say this dot ACC. So the acceleration is added to velocity. And it's a random vector, so the speeds will be pretty random. So let's see what happens. If I run this, fingers crossed, and it works. Look at the speed, right? Because it's getting accelerated at each point. So look at the speed. It's just zooming off the screen. Look at that, pretty cool. So if you want to make it better, if you want, in the fill function here, if you do this dot pos dot x, just like before, it will keep changing colors as it moves along your canvas. Let's see. If I run this now, look at that. As it moved away from the screen, the color changed. Look at that, pretty cool. Now, what if you want to slow down your acceleration? To slow down the acceleration, you have to use another function, very important, which is called set magnitude. So a new function which will be called set magnitude. Set magnitude, yeah, this is how we spell it, and this is how we do it. You say this dot ACC dot set mag, open bracket, and give a small number, let's see, 0.1. And now if I run this, the speed of your object moving on the screen will slow down, hopefully. Let's see. So look at that. If you look at that, it's moving, but in a slower way. Look at that. And then also changing the color. So if you see properly, it's starting slow and then it's picking up speed. That's what the magnitude function does. It starts up slow and then it keeps picking up the speed. So the acceleration is changing at each point. Okay, so what we can do is we can make, what if I put the background now into setup now. So What if the background isn't set up? What do you think will happen? So now if I run this, let's see, and let's make the background black, 0. Okay, so we'll have to remove this one if you put a background there. So look at that, pretty cool. The object is moving randomly and is also leaving a trace behind. So now what if you want two ellipses to move? So in that case, what you have to do is define two instances. So you say let W1 and let W2 be two things. And W1 is equal to new animation, and W2 equals new animation. Right, this one starts in the middle, let this one start at some other place. And in the function draw, you'll have to say W1.move, W1.shape, and W2.move, W2.shape. So what the W1 and W2 will do is it will go to the class animation, pick up the move function, and make the ellipse move according to what we've typed in here. And since there are two of them, two shapes will happen and they'll move in two ways. Let's see if I run this. Hopefully we'll get two shapes now moving in random directions. So look at that. Pretty cool. So if we use the array here, we can have multiple things moving in multiple directions. Right, pretty cool. So far in this one, we've learned how to use the position, velocity, and acceleration vectors in classes. And we've learned the add function, the multiply function, the set magnitude function, and how to use all of this together and do a little bit of physics here with position, velocity, and acceleration to move an object randomly in your canvas. Now there are some other important functions which we'll see in the next video, and with all of them together we'll create a good machine that follows the laws of physics. Cool. Any questions you can type in below and I'll try and answer them.